Hey everybody, Vincent the Lego here. This is part 2 of a 4-part series. First part was Game & Watch, so go ahead and watch that one before watching this one. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. Myths and Monsters is considered to be a spin-off of sorts, as it hasn't really been linked between the other games in the franchise. But you know what? Who cares? We got Pit the Angel flinging arrows at bad guys. What else could you want? Not only that, but this game has improved a lot on the flaws of the original. For one thing, there are no instant deaths from falling off the vertically moving screen. Now, you can get to point A to point B without the fear of making a misstep. Not only that, but the difficulty has smoothed out greatly as well. Granted, it's no walk in the park, but at least the first level is easier to play, save for that first dungeon boss. Speaking of dungeons, I really hated the map in the original, and unfortunately, that was not solved here. You need a map for the entire layout, a pencil to mark places you've been, and a torch to mark where you are. Now that's a pretty bad game mechanic considering you had to go find them all. But that's okay, the dungeons aren't that frustrating. All of Pit's abilities from the NES have returned for this game as well. We even got upgrades for strength, bonus items, and even more abilities to the already versatile Angel. And of course, we have the 3 sacred treasures at the end, which makes Pit nearly unstoppable for the end game. I couldn't ask for a more loyal sequel to a classic. I'm not really one for licensed games, so believe me when I say that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Radical Rescue is a good exception. It's funny how the Turtles tend to find themselves in either complete hits or complete duds in the gaming industry. It's safe to say that this is a good game, minus a few flaws right here and there. Let's get the problems over with first. The bosses you will fight are nearly unforgiving. They take too much health, have annoyingly difficult attack patterns, and losing is a big problem, as you have limited lives. I expect nothing less from Konami. There's also a lack of save points, as you only get password opportunities after saving a fellow ally, or by dying. Now let's talk about the good things about it. The action is pretty darn good for a Game Boy. The regular enemies are easy to fight against, and they are well placed to keep you on your toes. Navigation is actually not that bad, as you have a map filled with marked areas to keep you on track. If only Myths and Monsters worked like that, you know? And let's not forget about the turtles themselves. Each turtle has the same basic attacks, yes, but they have their own unique ability, like hovering or a wall climbing ability. TMNT 3 is a game with flaws, but they can easily be overlooked with a great controls, awesome level design, and pizza! Mario's Picross was one of those games that I was really doubtful of. My first experience of the game was that it gained small mention in Nintendo Power's Top 20 on the Game Boy games. And then of course there was Screw Attack, the gaming channel, which considered it one of Mario's worst games ever for some reason. However, I already bought the game for 3DS before listening to them, and it was a decision well made. Mario's Picross was a relatively cool idea, and introduced me to the concept of Picross puzzles as a result. But puzzle games such as these are not particularly interesting to a child of a young age, which was the only valid argument Screw Attack made. But if there's one complaint that I could really make, it's that the music is boring and actually kind of grating at times. But in all seriousness, I honestly would have never understood Picross had it not been for this game. The tutorial mode was really effective. Multiple puzzles and various difficulties made for a lot of replay value, and it overall made a fun diversion for aspiring puzzle enthusiasts like myself. Give it a try if you're up for a nice challenge. Revenge of the Gator. Fun fact, this was the first video game I ever played. No joke. There's something fascinating about pinball games on a handheld that makes for a completely unique experience. Maybe it's the portability, or maybe it's the fact that you don't have to pay those extra quarters. But that's beside the point. How well does the game itself hold up? To me, I would go say that this is the ultimate creation in pinball games. Better than Pokemon, and better than pinball for the NES. While the Pokemon pinball games had a really cool catch-em-all element implemented, Revenge of the Gator had something that trumped it: alligators. They're everywhere. Have them save the sphere. Have them eat the orb. Bunk one on the nose. Alligator Mafia. Alligator Peanut Gallery. Alligator Fairies. Lots and lots of gators. Boy, oh boy, was this a blast from the past in my youth. The Gator motif was pretty darn original, and you really felt like you were playing a legitimate pinball game. That's pretty impressive for Game Boy standards. I guess we owe that to HAL Laboratory, which also made the ever so popular Kirby games. This will be a game that I can never be mad at. Wait, no. Darn it, you stupid alligator! Eating my pinball.
Wario Land 2! Now, as much as I hear nobody talk about Excitebots, I could say the same thing about the second game in Wario's platforming escapades. It always gets kicked to the side, and I know why. Wario Land 3. It's practically a copy of Wario Land 2. Don't believe me? Similar enemies, similar Wario sprites, and the exact same sound effects. Need I say more? Wario Land 2 was really what gave our favorite anti-hero the moveset and power-ups we all recognize him for. Wario himself just controls pretty easy as well, and the guy is practically invincible, but the cost of getting hit results in coin loss. A consequence which was better implemented here rather than the third installment, where most wrong moves in that game results in redoing the entire part of a stage. While Wario Land 2 is ridiculously linear, it works a lot better than the constant backtracking in 3. Seriously, I get lost all over the place. Now, I'm not saying hate Wario Land 3 or anything, but I say give the second installment more credit for doing so many things first. And the good game mechanics.
Hey, it's finally time we talked about Pokemon. After all, Pokemon did debut on the Game Boy, as well as a hit children's anime. There was even an amazing card game as well, but we'll talk about that another time. Everyone here has their own favorite main game in the franchise. For some it's Emerald, and for others it's the Gen 2 remakes. And for my brothers, it's most likely Red and Blue. My favorite, however, has to go to Pokemon Yellow. Generation 1 of Pokemon was an absolute game changer in the handheld market, as there was little to contend with such a groundbreaking idea. It's a game centered around catching various critters called Pokemon, battling them, and eventually reaching the ranks of the anime's theme song.
I wanna be the very best, like no one ever was.
All three main games of Generation 1 were great in their own right, but Yellow version was my favorite in that you could walk around with a Pikachu and hear what he has to say with that cute little voice. Not only that, there's also Jesse and James of Team Rocket, and the ability to get all three starters, just like in the anime itself. I honestly can't say anything else about Pokemon that hasn't been said before. There are several YouTubers dedicated to the lore and the fandom itself. What I will say is that if you want to try an RPG style of game, then Pokemon's your first bet. Well, if the last countdown was an indication of anything, you knew that Game & Watch Gallery would make it on the list. It's kind of a shame no one really talks about Game & Watch Gallery. If it wasn't for Super Smash Bros. Melee, I'd be hard-pressed to see anyone know about Game & Watch at all. And that's really disheartening, really, because this and the other three in the series are phenomenal games in their own rights. These games create the best method of learning the really old-school designs of Nintendo. The first Game & Watch Gallery only had 4 games, but all of them are pretty much hit on the bullseye on how much fun they are. Those games are Manhole, Fire, Octopus, and Oil Panic. I've already said my spiel on Octopus and Oil Panic, so now that we're going to talk about the other two. Manhole has you control Yoshi to maintain the security of 4 manhole covers. It may seem easy at first, but it gets intense fast. Seriously, look at what you'll have to deal with in hard mode. Not ideal for first-timers of the franchise. Fire, on the other hand, is a bit more lenient. Just get the guys to the ambulance, and you're set. It's a great game when it starts to get rolling, but it has a bit of a slow start. And then there's the gallery. Honestly, there's not much here, but it's a nice history lesson. The later games are where this feature really steps up its game. Tetris Attack for the Super Nintendo is considered by many to be a frantic and lovable puzzle battle with the cast of Yoshi's Island, minus the babies. The game is fun, and the main story is fun too, but it's really nothing that needs a sequel, you know? But what if I told you there was a port of this game? A port that's almost as fun, no, just as fun as its higher resolution comrade. Well, you're in luck. Tetris Attack was one of those childhood games of mine that just fascinated me back when I had my Game Boy. And you know, it still holds up pretty well today. You got yourself a variety of modes, you got difficulties to overcome, and you got yourself an 8-bit version of the soundtrack that not only stays faithful to the original, but even some of the tracks have a bit more power to them. Take Bowser's theme for an example. It went from,
I'm a big fat guy, I'm a big fat jerk, here to ruin everything you love so much,
to,
oh, you are just so very screwed.
The story is roughly the same from both versions, and same with the difficulty as far as what I've seen. Puzzle mode is ridiculously fun, if only for figuring out those complex answers and seeing everything fall into place. Stage clear is an endurance match to see if you can eliminate blocks to a certain line. And then there's the two other modes which I really don't care about, cause I suck at making big combos and chains. Those are for professionals. So yeah, play Tetris Attack. You will love it. That is all. Link's Awakening was a different approach on the Legend of Zelda formula. For this instance of Link, he has slain the evil that was the Ganon guy. He now heads off in a boat, because I really don't know, but that's not important. He heads off in a boat, and a massive storm appears. He's struck by lightning, and now finds himself in the island of Koholint, where he spends the entire game trying to find a way to leave. And there's your story for you. The reason this game is so well loved is due to its fantastic transition to a handheld game. This was, in fact, the first handheld Zelda game. Well, minus the Game & Watch, and it has some massive expectations to fill. Fortunately, everything works out great, as Link is easy to move, has a great variety of tools, and has 8 dungeons to kick some butt in. I honestly can't think of much more to say about this Zelda game in particular. Maybe it's the fact that The Legend of Zelda has such a great formula, that people know it'll be good no matter what.
Gee, I sure is.
Hey, who said you can leave the depths of the internet?
But I digress. Aside from some iffy design choices, and the last 2 dungeons being a major pain, this is what I would call a great Zelda game. And now, time for a few honorable mentions. Kirby's Dream Land. The second game may have been larger and more important to the franchise altogether, but it had a really annoying side quest to access the main boss. The first Dream Land, however, was much more manageable and had a fairly good challenge as well. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. This was the game that proved Mario was awesome, even on a handheld. The game was easy, granted, but it did give us the challenging Wario's Castle. And let's not forget about the debut of Wario himself, the evil doppelganger of Mario, who eventually created a name himself as well. Donkey Kong 94. I have not played a game this satisfying and grand until I played this one. It's a Mario game like I've never played before. Sure, games like Mario 64 and Super Mario World were big leaps for the franchise, but Donkey Kong 94 has a sort of a unique feeling all its own. I love how the whole thing begins. It starts off like the original Donkey Kong for the NES and the arcade, granted slightly condensed in size. Then you get around to stopping Donkey Kong just like in the arcade, and it's all over, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Donkey Kong gets up and steals Pauline again, revealing that you haven't even scratched the surface of what this game offers. And from then on, the rules of the game change completely. Instead of the very basic arcade game it was based off of, it transforms into one of the most addicting puzzle platformer hybrids I've played. 9 worlds, 97 stages, and not one of them is the least bit boring or lacking. And that brings up one of the best things about this game: the pacing, the abilities, the fact that you're not doing the basics anymore. Mario this time around is well-rounded with several new moves, including the triple jump, the backflip, and several other abilities found in basic Mario games. Despite the limitations of being a Game Boy game, this is a massive game with many worlds to explore and just a lot of fine-tuning to it. Donkey Kong 94 is a game that I can easily put as my number 1.